All right. Hello and happy Thursday. I hope you are as excited as I am to talk all things RTI, MTSS, SLP in the classroom. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to add Brittney on here. I see she just joined. So I'm going to try to get her on here. And Brittney, if I'm not able to send you a request really well, you just got requested, so hopefully. There we go.
Hello.
That worked.
Yeah, it's working.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Hey.
Cool. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. It's very cold over here, so I'm all bundled up.
I was gonna say, you look comfy.
Yes.
I love it.
Yep. Oh, what cool. It looks like people are joining. Yay.
I know. Hi, people. This is fun. I always love in the beginning, and you can look down there and see all the people who join.
Yeah.
I like to hit the wave button at everybody. Hi.
Yeah, this is my first live, so bear with me, everybody.
Yeah, I don't know how many lives I've done, and I don't know. There's nothing to it. Now that you're on, all we have to do is talk until I hit the end button, and then I just have to somehow make sure I save it and not delete the video, and we should be good to go.
Perfect. All right. Well, we started with no tech problems, so hopefully we'll end with no tech problems.
I was gonna say, knock on wood. I haven't had tech problems in a while, so hopefully on both of our ends, it bodes well for us.
Perfect. That sounds great.
I'll also tell you, assuming people are gonna be interactive, which people always are, and it's very helpful. Sometimes I am so into either talking or like listening that I miss people like making comments or asking questions. Help me watch the comments, and if someone does make a comment, all these people that are listening, or you ask a question, like put it a couple times in case I miss it the first time.
That's good advice, I think. That sounds great.
But I guess while we're waiting for anyone else to trickle in, we can give a couple of introductions. I'm sure people at least know one of us, but so that they know both of us. I'll give a simple introduction. I'm Callie Knight. I'm a school-based speech language pathologist. I work with kids ages pre-K to 6th grade. And I'm sure you'll learn more about both me and Brittney as we go. So I'll just let you know who I am in my setting for now.
Perfect. I'm Brittney Freedon, and I also work in a pre-K to 6 school, but I only work with pre-K through 1st. And I've kind of like niched down to my grades that I really love working with, so I can really focus on the things that I feel confident with. And part of that is this like Rti, MTSS thing in the younger grades, and that's how I kind of ended up where I am.
And I'm so excited to hear more about it, because obviously I know a little bit about it because I've talked to you about it, and I think it's fascinating, but I'm excited for other people to hear about it. Because even if they're not at this point with their school, I feel like you've done a lot of advocating to get where you are. It's not like you just like came into this dream job of, you know, this caseload and this RTI model. I think you did a lot of work to get where you are.
Absolutely. And I think it's so hard. A lot of us are facing like burnout and just unrealistic demands. And it's, you know, it's easy to say like advocate, 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 because we don't all have the tools to do that. We don't have responsive administrators. But, you know, nothing gets changed without trying. And so when I started in my job, my current job, I was a CF, and I'm still there 5 years later. And that's what I had to do. I just had to say, you know, I don't really think what we're doing is working. And they didn't listen to me at first. And we made small changes. And every year we're just making small changes to make it easier. But when I started, I definitely felt like the caseloads were unreasonable and they were piling more and more things onto us, do more screenings, do more evals. And that was unsustainable for me. And I know a lot of other SLPs. So I think just, you know, explaining different options and really understanding RTI and MTSS and how you can use it to your advantage. It makes you a better advocator for your role. And that's kind of what I fell into over the last 5 years at my district.
Yeah, and I would venture to say I'm not currently in this situation, so I can't speak from experience, but maybe you can, that once you've advocated and gotten more into those changes, I think that administrators will see that they really did make a big difference, both for students, and I'm sure SLPs are sitting here like, think of how much paperwork that reduces when maybe a kid just needs, you know, that tier 2 intervention, or, you know, not a full-on IEP and you can provide those services there, it's much easier to provide that amount of service than that amount of service and a little bit more for an IEP, and then all the paperwork and meetings that come with an IEP.
Absolutely. And you just feel more prepared when it comes time to the kids that are on IEPs, because it's not just, someone brings something to your attention, you do a simple eval and you put them on an IEP. You've worked with their teacher and their parents over time. You've tried different things and seen how they progress, because I think a lot of times that's missing, and you talk about like dynamic assessment a lot, is the students' learnability. Some kids, they just pick up on things quicker, even our kids with language delays. And so going through this RTI process with them beforehand, you learn a lot about them as a learner before you even get to that IEP part.
Exactly. It's like, I mean, obviously, like you said, I love dynamic assessment and I use it in my assessment anyway, but RTI plays that role for good referrals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because if they're not making response to the intervention over time, there's a good chance they're having a learning disability in some area, or there's some deficit that needs more instruction than just, RTI. And I guess maybe I'll like take a step back for a second, because I'm assuming people who are coming here know what RTI and MTSS are, but I just got so excited to talk to you that I jumped into that. But maybe let's take like 2 mini steps back and tell people what RTI or MTSS is.
Yeah,
I think you knock it out.
Yeah, so RTI is response to intervention. And the idea is it's a tiered model of instruction. And so all students start at tier 1 and they get universal design for learning. And it's based on evidence-based practice, which we know and love. And I think educators are trying to know and love more. And that's designing the curriculum that the kids are using to be the most effective for development of reading and literacy is the big push. And oral language plays a huge part in that, but I think sometimes it gets missed a little bit in the design of the curriculum. And then like tier 2 would be, the student's struggling, what can we give them more of to try to help them meet where their peers are? And then tier 3 is like, something is not working, this student needs more support, generally speaking. Every state and district interprets it a little differently, I think, but that's the general outline. And then MTSS, I feel like, is the new kid in the club. It stands for multi-tiered systems of support. And depending on where you are, it's RTI, just with a different name. And then in some places, it really is a different system. So I'm in Massachusetts, and we've been using more of an RTI model for years. Right. This year, the big push is for MTSS. And the only real difference I see is that it's more of a circular approach instead of like climbing a ladder approach. And so kids who are on tier 3 instruction for speech and language should still be receiving tiers 1 and 2, which I think makes a lot of sense. So it's more of just like a building versus like, here we are at tier 3, where do we go next? You're building up from the bottom for the students that are struggling. But that's my understanding of it. What does your school refer to it as, RTI or MTSS?
They call it MTSS, kind of like we said, because we're moving on. And something else, and this, right, I feel like people say RTI and people say MTSS, and there are some probably consistent principles like what you discussed, and then some people interpret it as they want. But for example, my school, the reason they now call it MTSS, and the big difference they see also is that it doesn't only include academic areas, it also includes social emotional areas and behavior areas, where RTI traditionally was just academics based. And so now we're looking at all of those deficit areas that could contribute to academics, including behavior and social emotional. But other than that, totally exactly what you said.
Yeah, you're right. I have seen a bigger push towards increasing that social emotional learning in general, but also building in interventions to improve it for students. That's really a struggle for them right now. So I think that is a good distinction. So it's hard because I think, you talk to an SLP from one state and they say, oh no, SLPs are not involved in RTI. They should not be involved. They don't get involved until kids have done everything and nothing worked. And now they're at above tier 3. But then you talk to another SLP like me in Massachusetts, where I get started right on tier 1 and I'm there with the students through the whole process. So I do think you have to really talk to your administrators to find out what is your role. And if they don't have a good definition for you, that's a good place to start advocating, is where should you fall within those tiers of instruction.
And hopefully if people don't know the answer to this question right this second, they can leave with it and maybe be able to propose what your role could be, because they probably honestly don't know. And if you leave that can of worms open, they may or may not give you what you were anticipating, or a bunch of things that were not what you were anticipating. So hopefully from this live, anyone who doesn't have an answer to that question yet will leave with a couple things that they could propose, like maybe this is how it could look, both long-term and both steps that we could feasibly take in the immediate future.
Yeah, I agree completely. You know, when I started, for me, RTI has been really a way of giving myself credit for all the work that I'm doing separate from my IEP kids.
Yes.
Because when I started my first year, I was going into classrooms and doing these supplemental lessons to model strategies for the teachers. And, you know, I was being pulled aside in the hallways constantly to screen kids that teachers were worried about, but none of that was documented anywhere. And so it looked like I was, you know, completely going crazy with just my caseload, which I do think I'm fairly lucky where I am in terms of caseload size. There are some SLPs who are extremely overworked across the country. And if that's you, I don't think you need to be worrying about RTI. I think you need to be advocating for workload and more SLPs. But, you know, when I started, I just felt like I was doing all these things that fall into RTI, but nobody was giving me credit for it. So I made a role for myself, and now there's documentation in place.
Which probably not only makes you feel good, but I feel like when there's documentation, there's something to show that, look, we're making progress, or look, we're doing something that's helping, instead of you knowing it's helping, but no one else intentionally knowing it's helping.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you had mentioned too about increasing your value with administration through like showing where you can fall in these
Right.
tiers. But I think it also, for me personally, really increased my value with the classroom teachers, because when I started this, before I was really involved in all the steps, I was just the lady who comes and takes the kids to her room. You know, we work on something. They don't really know how it's helping. They attend the IEP meetings. They don't really know. You know, it just was very like I was a separate role. And that's not how it should be. You know, we're school-based SLPs. Our job is to make sure the kids are performing well in the classroom. It's supposed to be academically driven. And I just felt like it was so separated. And so now that I'm in the classrooms more, which I know we want to talk about today, because you also enjoy being in the classrooms more, the teachers now kind of respect me more and understand how I can help them. And they're more willing to try things that they see me doing while I'm in the classroom, I think.
Exactly. This is also exciting. Like, my mind goes in a million directions every time you say something. First it's like, yes, and then it's like, and this, and this, and this.
Yeah. Well, it's such a big undertaking, RTI. And I really want to emphasize that, like, for sure, I didn't do this overnight. It was like small steps over the last 5 years. And I still feel like I have such a long way to go. But I think starting with what is RTI at your school and where do you fall into it is the best place to start for anybody.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I mean, and some schools don't even have RTI or MTSS, or they kind of say they do, but they, you know, because most districts have to federally or at the state level, they have to say that they're doing something. Yeah. But it may not be established, and you may be the one that's able to say, I don't see an intervention going on. Maybe we could try this. Or, I mean, there's a million things that you could say, but I just love everything you said. And in addition, I feel like we look at our role as SLPs. And when I was talking to my admin about some things that I wanted to suggest for my program, because I felt like they could do so well at academics, they did so well at behavioral and social emotional, and then like our speech and language area, I was like, I don't see any quality tier 2 instruction going on. So of course, if someone has a concern, it goes essentially straight to a SPED referral, because I didn't see any intervention going on. So I provided some solutions that I thought I could participate in. And their first thing was, I didn't think SLPs could do that. Because I guess sometimes like OTs in my state, they can't do anything until there's like an IEP in place or for special education, whereas SLPs have a very preventative role, just as they have a rehabilitative role. So I think that was eye-opening, if nothing else, for my school to say, oh, I mean, we haven't been involving SLPs that much, but we also didn't think we could.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's a great example, the OTs versus SLPs, because I had to create like a documentation system. So for my district, parents have to consent to my tier two interventions.
yeah,
So it's still very much documented. Like for legal purposes, I want to make sure that I'm not providing services to kids that don't require them, and whose parents aren't informed that they're receiving them. Whereas I think with the literacy interventions in my school, it's much more informal and kids just get picked up.
right.
But mine is pretty structured across the tiers. Um, so yeah, so I think you have to make, and that's a good point. You have to kind of know what is your role at each tier and make sure you're doing everything you're supposed to legally for your state, because it does differ by state what we're permitted to do as speech language pathologists. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like, so that is I wish I could say I knew what every state said, but that might be it. Everyone can take home and see what your state says because there are 49 other ones in Texas and I only know Texas.
Yeah, and it's so different. And like I said, every state has its own issue, in terms of how we're supporting students in the schools and caseloads and stuff like that. So you just kind of have to start where you need to advocate for your, for me, it was advocating for a workload. So I count RTI as part of my workload, because what got us started on this topic was that I go in and do the whole class lessons as a tier one intervention. So in my usually I only do it in kindergarten, but because the current first graders didn't really have a kindergarten year last year with the pandemic, I'm doing it for both kindergarten and first grade this year. But I go into every kindergarten classroom on a biweekly basis, and I co-teach with the classroom teacher on an oral language skill to try to support the kids, to make sure they have that like universal design for learning in tier one. And oh, I just lost my train of thought. I am also like 6 months pregnant, so I can't keep track of any thoughts in my head.
You're good.
I'm trying my best. But I co-teach with the teachers in the classroom, and originally I just started doing that and it didn't count towards my caseload. So that's a lot of time in my week, and I had to advocate for a workload approach to count that. So those lessons count as students on my caseload now.
So again, reiterating that she did not do this over time and it wasn't just like she had an idea and then it worked the next day. You probably had a good idea and it was good and then you realize there's still a kink. We need to work on workload now. Yeah. So it's a step-by-step process.
Yes, definitely. So I had asked a couple questions on my stories, like in preparation for this, just asking LPs kind of, are you involved in RTI? And I would say it was like 50-50 in whether they were involved in an RTI process at their school. And then I had asked what tier they're involved in. And I wasn't really surprised to hear this, but most people said after the tiers. So after the kids have gone through the whole process and nothing else is working, then they might refer for a speech language eval. And that was interesting. That's what I expected, but it's still interesting to hear because I do feel like RTI across the country is starting to be, and MTSS is starting to be more for all areas of instruction. But most SLPs that responded said they didn't get contacted till the kids went through the whole process. I know you asked some questions too on your stories.
They were pretty much the same thing, and it's like, really, it was the same thing that you said. So I don't even need to read.
Yeah, perfect.
This is exactly what you said, and I got very, very similar responses.
Yeah. I guess we can talk about, so I do think the first step is understanding your process at your school. And the next step is, if you don't have a role in it, is working to define that in a way that's effective and reasonable for you, because I don't think RTI should be just one more thing we have to do as SLPs. I think it should be the way you structure how you find students and interact with students. So it's not an addition, it's kind of like a different way of thinking of your whole caseload. But then I guess talking about like, what do you do at the different tiers? Because I think some people don't really know what to do at the different tiers. Like, great, you want to help out, but you don't know where to get started. So at tier one, I find that you can collaborate with admin and with like curriculum teams. In my district, I know right now a lot of the curriculum doesn't have great grammar instruction. I don't know if you find this in your school, but that was one thing that I could do. I joined like the curriculum planning team looking for a new grammar curriculum because I felt like as an SLP, I could weigh in on what kids should be able to do at each grade. So you can certainly join like committees. A lot of schools will pay you a stipend to be on a committee, which is really nice. But you can, just collaborate with admin and with the curriculum planning team. But then you could also do whole class lessons, and that's something that I really like doing. I like being present in the classroom with the kids, and I think that I have a better idea of what the whole grade is doing because I'm in the classroom so often. And the teachers have a little bit more value for me because they see like me in the moment providing strategies to students and them improving on the skills that they're working on.
Right.
So at tier 1 for me, I definitely try to be present in the classroom and teaching teachers different strategies they can use for different oral language skills. And I know you do you do push-in, you believe in the push-in model a little bit, and you think that being more present with like curriculum-based interventions and classroom teachers is a good path for us. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add about that.
I was gonna say, I agree. However, I would clarify just to be in full transparency. When I say I am all for push-in, that is true. However, if you ask me right now how many teachers I'm pushing into or have this year, only 2. And it's not because I don't have anything set up. What I do is I establish rapport with one teacher at a time.
Yeah.
And I talk with the kids and their needs. So the teachers know that these kids need A, B, C, D, E. And I discuss what we're doing. And then sometimes I'll say, especially after the pandemic, all the kids are struggling and the teachers are so stressed. And so I just offered, I said, hey, during intervention, they have intervention time every day. And I said, can I just come in and do a whole group lesson? Instead of doing, my speech therapy time where I pull out the 3 kids from her class, can I just come in and do essentially their speech therapy session, but in a whole group setting? And she was like, sure. And I went in and did it. And of course, if anyone knows me, I'm a narrative language person. So of course I did like a narrative retell and comprehension lesson. And of course, that's one of the they don't call them the same thing everywhere, but in Texas they're called the T's. They're like the standards, essentially the curriculum. That's something that kids really struggle with. And she just saw it click when we were teaching explicit things like story grammar and systematically decreasing supports. And she was like, can I do this in the classroom with all my kids? And I was like, yes. And then she's been invested. And so she asks me to come back, and I can't always come back as frequently as she wants me to, but I'm going one teacher at a time. I'm not like walking up to every teacher and being like, I'm coming to your class at this time and I'm giving you a lesson. It's very slow, but I've been very successful one at a time.
And that's the way you have to do it. And that's certainly how I started. Now, all the kindergarten teachers are like, when can you come back to our room? But that's like a 5-year process that we've been going through, and they've seen progress consistently every year. But when it started, there was a lot of pushback. And I felt like when I went into the room, the teachers were like, okay, your role is to be an assistant to this student, go sit with them in the corner. And that's not the role that I wanted and not the purpose of my services. And so, yes, just advocating and saying like, hey, I have an idea, let's try it. And sometimes the lessons are terrible. They go awful. I certainly have great classroom management skills. That's why I'm a speech therapist. I like small groups of children, but it gets better with time, and the teachers see like that the things you're trying to teach really are missing from the curriculum, and they really are necessary for the kids to make progress. I do a lesson with like story bracelets using story grammar elements. Teachers love it, especially because none of the kids come in being able to tell an efficient story. You get a lot of those like rambling stories that don't make any sense. So that's something that I've been doing the last couple years, and it's probably my classroom teacher's favorite, that and following directions. Because there's no curriculum in place for that. Really, there isn't, at least in my district. No. I'm sure some schools have a good curriculum that embeds some of these schools, but where I am, the kids never get explicitly taught how to follow directions, and they never explicitly get taught story grammar markers. So I have found, I agree, that's a great way to kind of worm your way into classrooms because the teachers are usually struggling with those skills and they want our strategies.
Exactly. I was actually talking to a teacher today who came in. I did a lesson in her class today, and she's like, I have a kiddo, and he's autistic and largely echolalic, but for whatever reason, when we do narrative intervention, he'll be fairly spontaneous and he'll retell a narrative, and sometimes answer questions. And so, but he'll do it for me in speech therapy, but wouldn't do it in their progress monitoring because, I mean, there wasn't much structure. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, it was a little hard and overwhelming for him. But I guess the teacher asked comprehension questions and she pulled out the story grammar icon that I left with her.
Yep.
And he was able to spontaneously answer who were the characters. And she's like, she cried. She's like, I've never seen him do anything like this before. And it was just because we've been practicing over the past few weeks, breaking down story grammar instead of emphasizing just beginning, middle, end. Because that didn't mean anything to him or anyone else in the class.
Yeah.
But breaking down story grammar and getting essentially the beginning, middle, and end for free because you have that sequence. She's like, why aren't we doing this? And I was like, I don't know. They introduced it in 4th grade. Why they don't introduce it in kindergarten when they're doing retell? I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. There are so many skills we work on in our speech therapy sessions that I feel like most general ed kids would benefit from the instruction because it's just not there. The teachers have so many things they have to teach. And some of these pieces just get lost when they switch to new curriculums and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that regardless of whether it's like purposefully part of an RTI or if it's just a way that you're trying to become more valuable and more visible in your school, I think offering whole class lessons to teachers is a great way to really teach them the strategies, because ideally if the teachers learn the strategies and they start implementing them with their whole class year after year, you'll see less referrals in those areas because the universal design for learning, the way that the classroom is built, is now supporting those oral language skills. And that's what I've found, is that by going into the classrooms and really educating the teachers on these foundational skills that the kids are missing, they're making more progress and I'm getting fewer referrals down the road, which is great for my caseload and for anybody's caseload.
Yeah. I agree. And just to put a plug in for this, anyone who's listening to this and I was like, that sounds really good, but I am freaked out to like go to a whole group lesson. I've never done that. Trust me. I mean, I've done a lot of them and I still biff it and I'm still nervous, especially I have a couple teachers where they know if things go off the rails, it's fine, but we're friends now. There are other teachers, especially when I go in for the first time, I'm like, please go semi-decent so they'll want me to come back. Like,
yes. Yeah.
But it's scary. So if you're feeling a little bit like, I don't know if I can do that, that's normal. Just jump. Just try it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. I was like, I'm just going to be real here. I get nerves every time.
That's so important. And I try to, so I do these lessons almost every day. And every day on my Instagram page, I go on my stories and share just what I did that day. And I usually try to share kind of the outline of the lessons that I taught to give you an idea of the things that I'm doing. And I try to do a lot of hands-on things because kids don't want to sit there and listen to anybody else. So I do a lot of like games and, if we're doing categorizing, I'll bring in toys. I feel like toys are an anomaly in 1st grade, which is silly because they're 6-year-olds. But, I think like bringing in games and hands-on activities, like I said, when we do the story grammar, I make bracelets with all the kids and they keep them in their pencil boxes. And this is anecdotal, but a couple years ago, a student stopped me in the hall and he said, that tool you gave me, it really helped me in school and I'm a better writer now. And I was like, oh my God. And this was just a general ed kid who never needed speech therapy, but he was just part of the group when I gave this lesson. So I think hands-on things and trying to brainstorm ways you can be hands-on. And if you need ideas, come hop over to my page any day. I'm happy to help you with ideas. But I think you get better at it. You just get better at it. Because when I started, I certainly was not good with classroom management. And I was like sweating when I left the whole class lessons. But now I love it. I look forward to it so much.
And I think something that goes along with what you said that was unstated, but a theme here is I think it can be nerve-wracking regardless, but being able to go in with a lesson planned is good and helpful. And I feel like some people are like, what am I supposed to do? Like, you know, for a whole group lesson, for me, honestly, I mostly do what I do with my kids in speech therapy, just the large group. But I know you actually have a lot of lessons and a lot of things that you've compiled and prepped and made. So, and I know you talked about too. You talked about your following directions. Is that the same as your visualization one?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, that one. And your
Yes,
short, you know, your
over the
short one.
last like 5 years, I've made like 20 lessons that focus on speech and language skills that I feel like kindergarten students, and right now, well, kindergarten through second grade, I will say, seem to be missing. This just like basic foundational speech and language skills that's not embedded in the curriculum, and I'm always getting referrals for. And so that's what I do. I go into the kindergarten classrooms and I just assume that we need to all learn these skills, and I teach them. And I've made it so the teachers have a very clear part in that. It's not, okay, Miss Freegon's here, so I get to go take a little break. They're here supporting the students that are struggling. And that's kind of one of the ways we identify kids that maybe need to go on to a tier 2 intervention, is the kids who aren't benefiting from the group instruction that I'm doing in that moment. But I go in and I always start with making your brain listen, having a listening brain. Like full disclosure, a few years ago, more of a whole body listening lesson, and I moved away from that because I understand every kid listens differently. And now I just focus on helping kids become better at self-monitoring what their brain is thinking about. So I talk about your listening brain. We do a visualization lesson, which they don't teach any visualization till like
No.
4th grade.
And they teach it in the context of reading comprehension.
Yes.
Not just like oral language. They wait until reading comprehension to do visualization. But it's like, no, we need visualization for oral language first.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's like the phonological awareness piece that was missing from reading intervention for a while. It's this visualization piece for all things, not just reading comprehension, but visualization, following directions, story grammar. I focus on it from like a writer's perspective, writing your own stories, but also from a reader's perspective, monitoring your reading. And then I have a whole bunch of like vocabulary lessons and articulation lessons, because nobody can say S in kindergarten. in my area, none of them can. So I would be picking up the whole school if I did that. So I do a lesson with the kids on your secret sound, keeping your tongue secret.
I love that.
But yeah, I do have these lessons that I've established, but they're based on speech therapy techniques. They're not just like random things that I came up with. They're the lessons I do with my kids who are on IEPs for these skills. I've just kind of packaged them into like a 15-minute lesson where I can teach it to the whole class and kind of see, okay, who is struggling with this, and model for the teacher, this is a different way you could work on these skills to support your kids in the classroom.
And I'll just put in a plug. I've seen these lessons and they are amazing and quality. And like she uses like literally evidence-based strategies that we would work with, you know, our kids in the speech room, because they're going to help kids in gen ed too.
Yeah.
It just happens to be that we might have to use those strategies a little bit more frequently or provide a little bit more support, but they're really strategies that help all children. So
no, and I really do emphasize, like, I don't think you need a program. I don't think you need anything. I think if you're looking for ideas, there are things out there that can help you. But you really just need to think about what is missing from the curriculum in your classroom. What are you getting most of your referrals for? And then what strategy could you teach the teacher to try to head off some of those referrals? If she was doing something in the classroom every day, would these kids be referred to you? And how can you kind of market it to be fun for the kids? So like for following directions, I teach them the listen, repeat, picture, go strategy. So I go into the whole class. I say, oh, we're going to learn a tool. I say, raise your hand if following directions is hard. Oh, it's super hard for me too. I say, here's a trick. Ready? And I teach them listen, repeat, picture, go. And then we practice like Simon Says style. I just say like, put your hands on your head. Oh, wait, I didn't hear you repeat. Okay, everybody repeat. Put your hands on your head. Okay, picture it in your brain. Okay, go. And I'm monitoring to see which kids cannot slow themselves down to repeat and picture. Those are the kids that probably do need to go on for a referral. But in the meantime, the teacher's like, wow, these kids are actually following these directions. I'm going to try this. And then they start using that evidence-based speech therapy strategy. That's a strategy that we've all read about at some point, you know. So I think use what you have and kind of look at the referrals you're getting and see where maybe you could kind of intervene in the classroom to maybe prevent some of those referrals.
I love that. This is making me think so much because that's so much more intentional than sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm like, today all I can do is instead of doing this in small group, we're going to go do it in the whole classroom.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think there is that's making me think. And right now I'm not super stressed because I'm talking about something I love and not burdened by work right now. But now I'm thinking of all the things that I could do, like certain lessons or skills I could do. Whereas usually I'm just like, instead of doing this narrative, retell, and comprehension thing in small group, we're going to go do it in the classroom. So here's two ends of the spectrum. Don't plan, but just jump. And then once you get more comfortable, be more intentional. And you might have to learn about the curriculum, or you might have to learn about what those kids need in order to do that. So.
And I think that's a great, it's hard. It's a whole, it's difficult to stay up on evidence-based practice as an SLP. And then on top of that, if you're a school SLP, they want you to stay up to date on all the curriculum changes. And you could get like whiplash with all the changes they make. I feel like every year it's a different literacy program, a different thing, but you build relationships with the teachers and you say, hey, like what's not working? What's not working in your classroom? And then you brainstorm, you think of things and I really want to emphasize for sure, this did not happen overnight. I spent time with the teachers. What are your kids struggling with? And they say, none of them can follow a direction, which sometimes I think maybe the directions are a little too hard. And I talk about that with the teachers also. Or they say, we use Writer's Workshop, the like Lucy Calkins program. And it just dives right into writing. The kids just move right into writing. And no one teaches them to brainstorm their ideas. And so I think story grammar is a great way to help supplement the teachers in that way. They said they have to write these sentences, but their sentences don't make sense. And I'm like, well, they're 5 years old. They don't even really know how to put letters together. And you want to tell a story. We need to teach them how to think of a story. And so I kind of like marketed down story grammar.
Right.
I don't teach all the elements, but I picked a few that I think a kindergartner could start with. And I helped them learn how to brainstorm orally. And the teachers realized like, hey, when we take time to pause, brainstorm, and then go to writing, the kids are much more successful. So this is not something you stumble on overnight, but talk to the teachers, ask them, what are the kids having a hard time with? What's missing? What do they think is missing from the curriculum? And they'll be able to help you.
I love that. And I love that every time we've even come up with one of these examples, it's in my experience and in what we just talked about, 98% of the time, if it's not artic, if it's language, it's oral language based. I think curriculums have gotten to this point where we're so on written language and literacy and reading comprehension that we forget that the foundation of every one of those things is oral language. And they don't do as much oral language intervention. They don't do as much oral language progress monitoring or anything. They'll say they do it often, or at least where I've worked, they'll say, well, we're looking at listening comprehension, or they don't say listening comprehension. I have to teach them. We need to do some listening comprehension, because just because you want them to decode and then comprehend, the decoding part, if they can't decode, you don't know what they can comprehend. And so that's kind of been an epiphany for a lot of my teachers that are like, that's true. Well, then how do I figure out what they know without making them read it? So that's also somewhere, that we know all about oral language. And in the context of schools, that's largely what we're working on. Yeah,
and we have such a unique, our role is so unique as SLPs. I feel like we really are very data driven, and we understand, we're better able to understand that everything is a process. There's a hierarchy to learning these skills. And I think that gets lost in a lot of the academic intervention areas. And so that's one way that I felt like I've been valuable at my school, is by teaching them, and actually Seeds of Learning, Tara, right?
Yes.
So she talks about how, there's gaps. If there's gaps, you don't start above the gap, you start below the gap. And I don't think that's common knowledge. It seems like common knowledge to us because we're speech therapists, and that's how we look at things. You know, we look at everything is built upon each other. You got to, we do like circular teaching, always going back to review beginning steps. And that's a lot of times seems to be missing from curriculum. And, you know, I just think that teachers are just as overworked. And so they don't notice those things. You know, they have so many kids to monitor. And this is a way we can be helpful, is by coming in and saying like, hey, I think the kids aren't making progress there because there's this gap missing. And maybe if we do this, we can fill it in together. And, you know, that's the best way to collaborate, is to just be like, I don't put it all on them, try to take some of the burden, and advocate for yourself in the process.
And I think when you approach it that way, teachers will be more willing to let you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, when you approach it exactly the way you said, like lightening their load, any person working in education at this point is going to jump at the opportunity for their load to be lightened. And so, I mean, I've had teachers who kind of shot me down and were kind of like, no. And so don't expect every teacher to be jumping for joy when you present these ideas.
Yep.
But for that, it's those little things. We've talked about this like 50 times, right? Like little steps. It only takes one teacher for it to go well with, and then she's going to tell her team, because she's like, y'all. And then not all the teachers, but, you know, then a whole grade might be saying, could you come do a lesson in my room too? And then you've got to figure out, okay, can I do this? Like for me right now, since I'm not really part of RTI, I have to figure out, okay, I do want to do this and it is going to be helpful, but how can I do it given my current situation?
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right about prove your value to the teachers that are receptive to it. Don't waste your time. If they're not going to carry over what you're doing, they're not interested in it. They want you to just be like an assistant at the back of the classroom. You know, that's unfortunate, but let the other teachers speak for you, because they do. When you go into the classroom and you teach them the strategies, they see that, like you said with your the student you mentioned, they see that these kids really can be super successful if you give them the tools that they need. So prove your value where people take it. Don't push yourself too much. I think that's good advice.
We're stressed enough as is. You don't need to be wasting your time on people that aren't going to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's awesome.
I'm loving this conversation.
Yeah, I could talk about it all day. I love being in the classroom, and you know, I think we really, as SLPs, school SLPs are trying to move towards being more curriculum based. I think when I started, and I still struggle with this, is you want to help all the kids. That's who we are as people. We want to help all the kids. But sometimes it's not necessary in the schools. You really have to think about, like, is the student successful in the classroom? And I think that's why our caseloads balloon out sometimes, is we're picking up every kid who maybe could be supported through a home program with their parents, or who could be supported with strategies in the classroom. And so for me, that's the value in RTI, is trying to see that I don't have to be the one that helps every child in the school, but I could support more adults to help more of the kids that I don't necessarily have contact with.
Exactly. And in that way, you're a lot more effective and efficient anyway, because it's like a roots system. If you start, you know, like over here, then they're going to get all their kids. And of course, I'm sure the teachers like you are going to share with the other teachers. And even if you haven't physically gone in there to do a lesson yet, they're going to say, Ms. Knight came in and she told me this. Did you know you could do this? And then, you know, they're usually like, I can't do it justice. Can you just go do it to their room? Because I can't remember exactly what you said, but they get other people hyped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, you know, look at your current situation. When I started, I only went into the classroom teachers that were interested or invited me in. And then I only went in like once a month for the teachers. And now I do bi-weekly lessons for all of kindergarten and all of first grade. And again, that counts towards my caseload, because that would be outrageous if it didn't. But you know, over time, I built it up to be more. And it doesn't have to be bi-weekly. It doesn't have to be every week. It can just be supplemental as teachers bring concern to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like sitting here. I made a list of the questions people ask me, and we've like hit most of them.
Oh, good. That's good.
Just in our conversation, we've hit like all of them. I think the only one we didn't hit, and I'm curious to see if you have a better answer than I had for this, but someone asked, how long is long enough for like speech or language RTI before you would make a referral to special education?
Oh, that's a good question. Again, I do think it'll depend largely on your specific district's requirements.
Yep.
I can just speak to what I do.
Yep.
So students, everybody gets this whole class intervention in kindergarten. And then if I notice students that I think might need a tier 2 intervention, or if the teacher's like, hey, listen, I've been trying these strategies, they're just not working, they'll refer them. We have like a Google form that they fill out. And so that's the documentation piece that was missing when I first started. So now there's a trail that this student was identified as having challenges. They've already received classroom-based strategies. And so then I would pick them up for what I call a short-term intervention. And for us, our short-term interventions are 8 to 12 weeks. And that's so after the 12 weeks, I look at their progress, I meet with the classroom teacher, and we decide, did they make sufficient progress? Do they just need more practice in the classroom with what we've been doing in our short-term interventions? Or is it time to refer for a special education eval? So I do 8 to 12 weeks. I just watched a RTI webinar on speechtherapypd.com.
Mm-hmm.
He mentioned that in terms of like trend lines, so when you're thinking about like data points, it doesn't become accurate until after 6 points of data.
Yep.
So I would recommend always doing at least more than 6 weeks, because really those first 6 weeks, it's not an accurate trend line of the student's progress. You don't start to see a good trend line until that like 8 to 12 week mark. So that's kind of why I do 8 to 12 weeks in my district.
Right. And like I can't say anything because we don't really have any interventions for speech or language in my district currently. So I mean, hearing things like this from you are good to know, if I was to propose that. I know that some of the intervention programs that I've heard of or that are used on the academic end have like progress monitoring, like little tests or progress monitoring tasks that they do. And after a certain number of times that you fall in the like at risk category, it would become a referral. I don't exactly know how many weeks that pans out to, but I know some intervention programs come with like a set amount where they've already done the research on it, so they know at about what point you might want to refer, but not everyone has that.
Yeah.
So I think your rule of thumb with the at least 6 weeks, if not more, is really important.
Yeah. So I treat my short-term intervention students just like my IEP students. They get assigned a speech time. I do various intervention models for the kids. So if they're referred to me for articulation, I do like speedy speech, which I know you were posting about this week, as part of a short-term intervention for maybe 8 weeks. I see students not usually one-on-one in the short-term intervention model, but in small groups. So I might have like once a week a small group that's working on story retell or following directions. And then I do what I do with my other students. I figure out what is the problem that they're having based on screening measures. So I use the self-screener, and then some informal stuff. I have something informal from the Speech Bubble SLP that I really like. And I just pick an intervention target. I write a goal for the kids. The parents sign off saying, yes, they can come to speech for 8 weeks. You're going to work on this goal. And at the end, I look at their progress. If they've made good progress, that tells me like their learnability is really great. That's like that dynamic assessment piece. And that tells me that it's probably not a disability and that they just needed some clear instruction on how to do that specific skill. But if they really haven't made progress, then I know that it's time to refer them for an IEP, and I already have a lot of data to support that decision.
Exactly. It almost makes the evaluation easier because you have what they have trouble with. It's almost no question at that point that there is, per IDEA, a disability, right? Because they haven't responded to intervention. So it's really just a matter of now putting that on paper and doing whatever additional evaluation you need to really get into the nitty-gritty, and then you're good to go. So it makes everything more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think with a lot of states moving towards this MTSS model, they want you to have this data before you refer for an IEP. It needs to be based on quality data. And so this is a great way to collect that data. And IDEA actually, I believe in most states, they have to set aside a certain amount for this RTI model. So that's a great way to advocate for your role, is that, part of special education is trying to prevent and early identify these kids through RTI. And we're part of special education and we're part of the prevention model.
And I didn't know the part about allocating a certain amount, so I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yeah, there's a certain percentage of the special education budget that is supposed to go towards these like preventative efforts.
For good reason. Well, I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know. Oh my goodness, this has been so fun.
Yeah, so I think we have like maybe 10 minutes left. It cuts you off at an hour. Is that true?
It used to.
Okay.
I want to say I used to. We should probably like be careful, just in case it does. But I've had lives that have gone on for like 80 minutes because it didn't cut me off. So.
All right. Well, I was just
Hopefully
going to say
people feel like this is PD, like free PD or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple people on here. If anybody has questions or like wants to share about RTI, I haven't really seen any comments. I've been looking to see if anything pops up, but
I was going to say, I've been seeing people just pop in and out and listening.
Yeah.
Maybe if people are thinking about questions. Oh, wait. Oh, Darla's swooping in with the comment. See, Darla's also in Texas. I didn't know about the allocated funds, and I hope that Texas does have allocated funds because that definitely would
I
be
think
good leverage.
Is Darla Miss Gardenia's speech room? Is that Miss?
Yes. Sorry.
I know she talks a lot about RTI too.
She has an awesome, Darla, I don't know if it's open anymore, but she has an awesome like Facebook group and program and little, I don't know if program is the right word, Darla. It's like PD.
Yeah. No, I think that's the first step if you're like super overwhelmed about this RTI thing is just educate yourself on it. You don't have to do anything this school year. You can just say this is, and I'm a big proponent of that, is like pick one area you feel weak in and just focus on it for the year. You don't have to change anything in your practice, but just say, if I have time to take a webinar or read a research article, it's going to be on this topic. So that way next school year, I can try to change a little bit in that area. So maybe RTI is your area for this year. And I know Darla does have some great information about RTI too.
And she just clarified for me that it is a course. That is the word that was not coming to mind. It is a course. And it's an awesome course too. So that I highly recommend Darla's course. Darla, I don't even know if it's open for people anymore. So sorry people if Darla's course is not open, but if it is, go to her page and ask her. But also, like, before we even start to close or talk about something else, I want you to tell people where they can find your resources for like push-in lessons because they are bomb. They're like so I mean, you could use them not push-in. You could use them for your own sessions, but I think you made them for push-in, right?
I did, yeah. So I'm seldom speechless. I'm on Instagram and I have a Teachers Pay Teachers store. I have a website that I have not been very good about this school year because I come home and take a nap every day right now. But seldomspeechless.com. And I made 20 lessons that are based on Common Core state standards, which not every state uses, but a lot of the state standards are reflective of the Common Core state standards. And so I looked at what oral language skills the state standards expected kids to have, even though they're not in the curriculum. And then I made lessons based on activities that I'm sure all of us are doing in our speech therapy sessions anyways. I just kind of bundled them with, like, this is what you can say to introduce to the kids the topic. Here's 3 or 4 activities, a picture book that goes along with the skill. And then I included information for the classroom teacher about how they can carry that over. And that's available on Teachers Pay Teachers. And I have every day in my stories, I share different lessons so you can kind of see what we're doing. I'm certainly not secretive about it, so I tell you exactly what I'm doing. So if you want to try to remake it on your own, that's fine. But if you're looking for something to get started on this tomorrow, I do have this kit available on my Teachers Pay Teachers store. Yeah.
And now that so many people have the link feature, you can link it so people don't even have to go searching for it.
Yes, I just got that. So I'll do that. I'll go over to my stories and I'll link it. But I did make them with the intention of them being like a tier 1 intervention. So I go into whole classes and teach the lesson plans. But I explain in it that you can also just provide them to classroom teachers and explain to them the purpose of the lessons. And it can be a general ed intervention provided by the classroom teacher, because some districts don't have the SLPs intervening at tier 1, and that doesn't mean you can't provide strategies for the teachers to do. But then I also use them as my tier 2 intervention. So if I have a kid who can't follow directions, I will just use that lesson plan over the 8 weeks and practice it with those activities. So there's lots of different ways you can use the lessons. And like I said, it's on 20 topics, but it's basic speech and language skills, following directions, visualizing, story, grammar, marker, answering and asking questions, vocabulary, and some articulation. Not all the sounds, but the sounds that the kindergartners are always referred for. Yeah.
I love it. But seriously, people. I mean, and look at this. If this is not the biggest flex ever, Brittney, Darla, so Miss Gardenia Speech Room says, I have your push-in lessons on my TPT wish list.
Oh.
that for you should be a big flex.
That's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
But I mean, I do sell things on Teachers Pay Teachers, but I am a firm believer that you don't need a product to do your job. I think sometimes it's easier if you're in a pinch to just have something made. I certainly buy things off Teachers Pay Teachers all the time, but I try to share in my stories just ideas for the lessons. So like I said, if you talk to your classroom teachers about what they're struggling with, then you can come back to my page and see different ways that I might try to work on that in the classroom, and you can kind of get ideas to brainstorm your own way to support your students and your teachers. But sometimes having something pre-made and ready to go takes a lot of burden off of you. So that's why I think, that's why I love Teachers Pay Teachers.
I totally agree. And if I haven't already stated this explicitly, if you do not currently follow Brittney, you need to. First of all, she's just a rad person. Your reels are the bomb. Whether they're humorous or helpful, they are my absolute favorite. Every time I'm scrolling and see one, I'm just I'll watch it 10 times. And then on top of that, she literally does come onto her stories every day and discusses things that she did. And she's very transparent. If something didn't work so hot, she's like, this happened. And she's very real, and she'll give you other suggestions. And I think it's just very, very helpful. So if you do not follow Brittney, leave the live right now and go follow her so you don't forget. Or use your following directions thing and repeat it to yourself. Follow Brittney. Picture yourself following Brittney. Now go.
That's very sweet. I feel like Reels for me brings out my inner drama kid, my high school drama kid. I'm so ready for the lip syncing. My husband's always like, this is so embarrassing. I'm like, no, it's
I'm gonna put you in the frame of the camera next time if you don't watch it.
He's a physical therapist, and I've been trying to get him to branch out and try to be more involved in the social media world for physical therapy. And he's like, how do you do this? I'm so embarrassed. And I think part of it is just accepting we're flawed. I'm flawed. Sometimes I do activities, the kids hate them. I'm like, this is fun. Why don't you love this? And that's just part of learning and growing. So I share those things on my stories too, that lessons that just didn't pan out.
And I think sometimes that's what's missing on things like Instagram, is that we all sit here and we're like, this is perfect. This is perfect. And then we go in our, I'm like, none of my things were perfect today. So when you see that everyone really isn't perfect, and that a lot of times we only show what actually worked out, it's comforting. One, brings you back to reality and gives you good expectations, and you're ready to go. You're in a good mindset for the next day.
Yeah, I feel like we put so much pressure on ourselves to help every kid and be knowledgeable in everything, and that's just not possible. And for me, I say I'm a recovering perfectionist. I struggled in high school and college with perfectionism, and being an SLP has helped me kind of break past that, because I like to think my students now are preparing me to be the best SLP for the students of the future. And of course, I feel bad that I can't do everything for my kids right now, but they're helping me for those kids in the future. And that's just my goal, is to just keep working towards being the best SLP I can be for the next set that comes through my doors.
I think having that mindset is like priceless. And I feel like we could have like a separate live on having that
Mm-hmm.
mindset and how helpful it is. Maybe we will. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
schedule it. Because I'll talk about it for an hour with you. Or
Yeah.
listen to you, better yet.
I don't have all the answers for sure. I was nervous about coming on here, but no, I think just the big takeaway is that if you don't know what RTI is at your school, you don't know your role in it, just start there. Just figure out what it is and see if there's a way that you can redefine your role to try to move more towards that workload approach and that curriculum-based approach, because those are the things that are going to make our jobs less stressful, is by having the workload approach and then using the curriculum to our advantage.
Exactly. So it's a long-term thing. Like she said, little steps at a time. I feel like I'm excited to be like you eventually, where you're on this end of like, you've been working hard and you've got to a good situation. Whereas like, I'm sitting here and I was like, I want to be there. But where I am at right now is I'm not even really in tier 1 or tier 2. I'm just providing my tier 3 or my special education interventions within the context of the classroom so that I can work with the teacher and provide my services. And that's just where I am right now. And I want to be more like Brittney. That's my end goal. But like it took Brittney a long time, it's going to take me a long time. But it doesn't matter where you are on this trajectory, whether you're before me, at where I am, in the middle, or if you're just like Brittney. We hope that you take the principles that we've discussed today and that you can go forth and hopefully help you, help your school, help you help yourself.
Yeah, and I like nerd out over this stuff, RTI and being more in the classroom. So feel free to message me on here. I'm happy to chat about stuff like that. I love talking to other SLPs. I'm lucky in my district, we have 4 speech therapists in the same building, so I'm not isolated, but some SLPs really are isolated. And if that's you, like, use us to your advantage. We want to talk to you and we want to help you feel not so alone as a school SLP, because it can be, I've worked in previous districts that it was kind of isolating. So
I agree. And I even saw some teachers hop on here. So teachers, that even more so goes to you, like reach out and invite us, and or just say hi if you haven't even really formally met the SLP other than her coming in and saying, can I have kid ABC? So for any teachers that are either on, we're on, or we'll watch this later, we're here for you. We want to be with you. So
yeah, I think teachers are just as overworked, and nothing makes me happier than when a teacher knows what my job is and knows that I'm a tool that can help them. That makes me like ecstatic. So definitely reach out if you're a teacher and you're wondering, what are SLPs even supposed to be doing in my room? Because there's a lot of secrecy. We seem a lot secret, but we're not.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we brought ourselves full circle.
Yeah, I think so. That's great.
Well, perfect. In that case, I'm just going to remind everyone to find Brittney. It's at Seldom Speechless. That's her Instagram handle. You can go follow her and just like watch all her stuff. I mean, you've got stuff also in your highlights, right?
Oh yes, yeah. I have kindergarten whole class lesson highlights, and every day I pop in my stories and I share things, and then a couple posts about it too. Yep.
There you go. So if you didn't already follow my directions earlier and go in, follow Brittney. Do it as soon as I press this X button, which I'm about to do.
Awesome. Thanks so much for chatting with me. I had fun talking about it. I really do nerd out over this stuff, so I'm happy to talk about it anytime.
Oh my goodness. Please, if we want to do a round 2 at some point, please just reach out and let's do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Awesome.
Alrighty. Have a good night. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye.